This call is being recorded.
Hello, everyone. This is Renee Rentmeester with the Cooking Without Looking TV show podcast. And today I am here with Rachel Longan. Rachel, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Really looking forward to this call today.
Well, that's great. That's great. And I see you're in California.
I am indeed. I'm in Berkeley, California.
So how's it like over in Berkeley, California today?
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful sunny day. We've had 70-degree weather in the last couple of days, and things are opening up. And so I actually went to a restaurant for the first time in many months yesterday, which was quite exciting. So things are looking
Wow.
up here in Berkeley.
Are they opening it up? Are they opening up for the inside or outside or both?
Well, this particular restaurant is actually just outside. It is an outdoor restaurant. There's no indoor part of it. So there are some restaurants I think that are having indoor dining, but this particular place is a beer garden where they have really good Brazilian food and beer and wine, and it's all outdoors. And they have like a little indoor part, but that's just for where they cook.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Well,
Yeah, it's a really great place.
tell us a little bit about yourself, Rachel. Tell us about your journey into blindness.
So I had my first eye surgery when I was 8. I have a condition that's called uveitis, which causes retinal detachment. And they didn't know I had uveitis at that time, but when I was 7 or 8, I started seeing floaters in my eyes, and eventually I had a couple of retinal detachments. One of them just sort of reattached itself, but then the second detachment needed surgery. And so I went into surgery when I was 8 years old, and I remember the doctor saying, "You're really lucky to have this condition now, because even a few years ago we would not have been able to treat it." And so they had this new treatment for attaching retinas back again, and they put a scleral buckle on, which is sort of like this belt around my eyeball to keep things together. And then I didn't really have any eye problems for many years after that. I mean, I didn't have fantastic vision, but it wasn't too bad. I made it through high school and college without needing any special vision equipment, and I was able to drive and I could see print. And then my second job out of college, I was a college admission counselor. So I was reading applications and recruiting for this college that I went to. And about a year into the job, I had a really bad bout of uveitis, which just made everything incredibly blurry, to the point where I couldn't read anymore. And I noticed that when I was driving, I was unable to read the street signs until I got really close, and the freeway driving was becoming kind of harrowing. I remember I was speaking to someone I worked with, and I'm like, I'm kind of scared to drive because I can't read the signs. And she's like, you might want to stop driving. And so I just remember feeling like, wow, it took someone else to tell me, look, I should probably stop driving to stop driving. So that was, when was that? That was in the early 90s. So it was a difficult time for me, because it was so sudden, and I wasn't able to do my job. And I remember telling someone, like, oh my God, I'm going to be a bag lady. I'm not going to be able to like make money. And I just didn't really know any resources. And so it was a difficult time. So I quit that job and continued to get treated for uveitis at a very good hospital at UCSF in San Francisco. And I took a part-time job, and then eventually the uveitis got a bit better, but I still couldn't drive. My vision was still bad enough that I couldn't drive. And then it plateaued for a few years, and then I went to grad school, and I really did need quite a bit of help in grad school. I remember I was with the Department of Rehab, that's what they call it here in California, where an organization that helps you basically get back to work. And they paid people to enlarge my textbooks to this enormous size. They were like 11 by 17. I had these
wow.
giant pieces of paper all over my apartment at that time of trying to read through my textbooks, and they provided a lot of other assistance for me for enlarging materials. And so I made it to grad school and continued to just sort of do okay. And then I decided to get surgery to start. I kind of just went into denial for a while, basically. I'm just like, I can't deal with this eye issue. I'm just not going to do anything. And then finally I'm like, well, maybe I should get a surgery. And that started a stint of sort of up and down surgeries that kind of helped, and then things would go poorly afterwards, because uveitis is an inflammatory disease. So they would do these surgeries, and then I would have an enormous inflammatory reaction, and then uveitis causes an inflammation first, and then scar tissue, and then the scar tissue basically kind of yanks your retina off, and
Ooh.
that just kept happening. So I had many surgeries over the years, and then eventually just kind of stopped trying to treat it and just try and cope with being blind. And I was just looking through my diary and realizing that this year is the 10th anniversary of me using a white cane. So I started using a white cane in 2011. And
What got you to do that? What finally got you to use the white cane?
well, that's a story. My mom was visiting, and we were in this mall near my house, which had stairs, and I didn't see the stairs and just walked straight sort of off the cliff of stairs and fell
Oh
partway down
my.
the stairs, and kind
Oh.
of just realized, wow, I can't be in denial about my level of vision loss. I really need to do something about this. And of course, my mom was completely horrified. I
Wow.
mean, she
So
just
how much?
basically watched me walk off the edge. So,
Oh.
yeah.
How much do you see right now, Rachel?
Um, so I can see some colors, and I can see light and dark. I can't read the printed page. I can't read any print anymore. And it's just getting worse and worse by each month. And so like about a year and a half ago, I could still, if you sent me a photograph, I would be able to tell what's in it. And now I can't look at photographs and recognize anything in the photographs.
Wow.
So I'm not totally blind. I'm not total, as they say in the in the blind
in the
community.
biz.
Right, in the biz, I'm not total, but I'm getting pretty close to that. Like, I can't recognize people at all. If I walk into a room and you're in there, I'm not going to know you're there until you say something or bump into something, or if I bump into you. That's all I'll know.
Well,
Yeah.
it seems like you have a really good attitude about it. What do you do to keep that attitude?
You know, I mean, I think I am a generally optimistic person, which has really helped me cope with this. I do try and keep learning. And one thing being blind does is make you have to keep learning. So I've recently, in the last 2 years, learned something called the JAWS program, which is a program where you basically go through your computer with keystrokes instead of with a mouse. And I was just putting my mouse away the other day, just thinking, you know what? Wow, I've learned enough of this JAWS program that I don't have to rely on the mouse, which is good, because I cannot see enough to use the mouse. The mouse requires sight, because you're pointing at things and landing on things that require you to be able to tell where the cursor is. So it's kind of a milestone for me that I can completely use my computer without any eyesight. And, you know, part of it is just necessity. You lose more and more eyesight, and you're like, well, I guess I really do have to learn this program. So I guess to get back to your other question of just how I stay positive, I think is that I do enjoy learning, and I am generally a pretty positive person. And it's not like I haven't had some pretty dark periods in dealing with this. And it's interesting because starting to use the cane was a really big turning point for me, because not only did it mean that I had to not be in denial about my own vision loss, but I also had to cope with other people seeing me as a person who's visually impaired. And when I first started using the cane, I literally had people come up to me at work and say, "You don't need that. Why are you using that?" It's like
Oh my
really
God.
crazy comments, like, "Oh, I'm
Oh.
using it because it's very stylish and I feel quite sexy using this cane. So I thought I would just use it just because it looks good." Like, why else would I be using the cane but because I actually need it? You know,
That's
it
right.
just
It
it kind
went
of
with,
blows your mind. But I think because other people just hadn't seen me as being truly blind, and then once you use a cane, it's an adjustment for everyone around you. Also, like, wow, okay, you really are blind if you're using that cane.
and then it
So
calls
some of
into,
navigating this is dealing with like other people's perception of you. It's kind of a big part of it. Yeah.
it calls into mind all the stereotypes, and then they start acting the way they think they should, or they what are they just not saying anything sometimes?
Do you mean people who are observing me?
Right, right. Do they, in other words, like some of your close friends or people who you thought were your good friends, all of a sudden sort of back away because they don't know how to deal with it?
You know, I have been fortunate that the people who are close to me have been amazing. I mean, a really good combination of supportive, but also not doing things for me and not abandoning me. Most of the difficult situations I've had have been with people who I don't know very well, or complete strangers. I've definitely had complete strangers say to me, "You're faking it. You don't need that cane." Like when I was
You
walking down
don't
the street
look
one time.
blind.
Yeah, you're not bumping into stuff, I guess. You're walking faster than what I think a blind person should walk. I don't know. Yeah, but I have been really fortunate in my family and my loved ones that they have been incredibly supportive, and told me that they're impressed with what I've been doing, but also not doing things for me, which I think is a big challenge for people who are going blind, is that sometimes people around you will do too much and you don't learn as quickly. So I think I've been really fortunate in people that I have in my life in that way.
Well, tell us about what you do for a living.
I'm a psychotherapist, so I help people navigate their worlds. Yeah, I became licensed. That's also sort of another blind story. So I graduated quite a long time ago, and then I started really going blind and was just like, I don't know how to deal with continuing to try and get licensed. And then also I have a child who has special needs, and that also happened at the same time, where I was navigating parenting a child with special needs and going blind. I was just like, oh my God, I can't do the license thing.
Wow.
And then when I started using the cane, and it really became clear to me that I was probably gonna go totally blind, I got kind of a burst of energy of like, I really need to get my act together. I need to get licensed. I need to be able to run my own practice. I need to just be able to do this. And so I went back to interning. You have to do a gazillion hours of internship when you're a therapist before you can even sit for the license. And so I went back, and this is all kind of around the same time, actually, 2011, when I also started using the cane. I think that was just a real wake-up call for me. And so I went back to trying to acquire all of those hours that you need to acquire, and sat for the license, which was another saga too, because the licensing agency refused to accommodate my disability and told me that I couldn't use Zoom text, which was at that time a program that enlarges the text so that I could see it.
Right.
So
Right.
I literally had to get a lawyer to push them to allow me to use an accessibility program so I could take
That's
the test.
unbelievable.
Yeah, it was really a shocker to me. I got so angry. I have spent some time being quite angry. I'm not angry now. I feel better, but like, I just remember being enraged. It's just like, are you crazy? I'm I'm not trying to cheat here. I'm just trying to be able to see the words so that I can actually pass this test. So they finally, once I got a lawyer, they knew I was serious, and they let me use this program that enlarged the print. And thank goodness I passed on the first time around, because not everyone does. And I was
Yay.
just like, I really don't want to have to do this twice. So I became licensed in 2015, and I've had my own private practice since then.
Well, this may sound funny to you, but do you believe that your blindness actually helps you be a better psychoanalyst?
Um, it's a mix. I think, I mean, I've always been a good listener,
Hmm.
but maybe it helps me listen better. I think I'm aware of subtle non-visual cues, how people take a breath in, and just the tenor of their voice, I am quite sensitive to. But I'm not going to lie, not being able to see people's nonverbals it's a challenge. It is actually just sort of something I have to adapt to, and I have to be able to listen for a change in posture, and it's quite challenging. I don't know, whether I'm better off not seeing. I don't think I am, but I think what I've basically done is adapt.
Do
So,
you do the your clients, do your patients come to you, or do you have them on Zoom? How does that work?
well, since shelter in place, I had to go completely virtual. And so
Hmm.
I am seeing people either on video, or I should say they're seeing me and not seeing them, or or I'm doing just an audio call. So
Wow.
it's a mix. I often ask the clients whether they would prefer to do video or a phone, and it's probably 2/3 of my clients I'm seeing video. They're seeing me. So I prop my phone up and situate myself in front of the camera. I almost always have to say, am I in the right place? So you're not like looking at my forehead or something during the session. And I try not to move around too much, right? Because I'm not going to be able to orient myself again. So yeah, currently
Well,
it's all virtual for me. Yeah.
well, now you were telling me that you love to cook. Was this something you always loved to do?
Yes, I've always loved cooking. Cooking is my therapy. It's the way that I show my love for the people around me. And yes, I really love cooking. And my mom is a really good cook, and I definitely learned a lot from her. She actually had a cooking show when she was my age, actually. I think it was about the same time.
Oh,
She had
wow.
a radio cooking show. And I remember one time we were in a grocery store, and someone turned around and they're like, "Are you Janet McMillan? Because I recognize your voice from the cooking show." So it was kind of neat. We lived in a pretty small community, so people knew
Oh,
her from that. Yeah.
wow. Well, do you use any gadgets, special gadgets or anything that you like to cook with? Do you have an Instapot? What kind of things do you like to use?
I don't have an Instapot. I was actually in Montana this summer. That's where my mom lives, and a bunch of other relatives that I have. And I was staying in a cottage that my mom has, and she had an Instapot. And it was so funny because it was all digital. And I was like, oh, I've heard about these Instapots, but I can't see the buttons. And so it was one of the first times that I used this Be My Eyes app. So I
Oh,
basically like,
yes, yes.
hold the phone up, and the first guy I got was like total Instapot master. He's like, oh yeah, I love my Instapot. He told me all about how to do it. And so I did use it once with him, but I don't have an Instapot at my own house. Actually, I don't have very many. Well, I have a Cuisinart, chopper dealie that I use for the pie crusts and stuff.
You're not like a
Um,
massive high-tech cook, huh?
Not really. I guess I'm kind of old school. I mean, I do have a rice cooker. I always use a rice cooker, and
Sure.
I do use the Cuisinart quite a bit. So those are
Well,
probably the two gadgety things I have.
Well, tell us about your recipe today. Tell us about the chard tart.
Yeah, the reason I love this recipe is because it's really versatile. So what I usually do, I always make my own pie crust, and I highly recommend that to people that they make their own pie crust because they're so much better. And I use all butter, which is it can be a little bit fiddly. It makes the dough very tender, but also you have to kind of work quickly when you use all butter. And I have actually used butter and lard before, which is amazing tasting, but also
Yeah.
really fragile. So this recipe, I would just recommend if you don't have a lot of experience making pie crust, don't start with lard because it's way too hard to handle. Just do butter. So I'd start by making the pie crust, which I also do use my Cuisinart to make the pie crust because it's super easy. You put the flour in, you cut the butter in, you chop the butter until it's kind of a crumble, and then you put in ice water until it sort of forms its own ball, and then you squish it into. I make enough for 2 pie crusts because then what I do is I use the second pie crust later on in the week for another recipe. So the chard tart is very straightforward. You bake the pie crust, you bake it for 10 minutes, and don't forget to poke the bottom of the pie crust when you stick it in there, otherwise it'll bubble up. I've done that before, forgotten it. Oh man. And then the recipe calls for quite a bit of greens. It calls for a pound of chard, but you can use pretty much any greens you want to. You can use spinach or kale as long as it's young kale. You can use all kinds of different greens. And it looks like a lot. A pound is going to look like a lot, but you're going to be cooking it down. So don't worry if it seems like a ridiculous amount. There's no way that's going to fit in the pie crust because you'll cook it down. And you chop up the onions and garlic, and you stir fry that a bit, and then you put the chard or whatever greens you're going to use. And then another part of the recipe is throwing in some fresh herbs. And again, it's really versatile. You can use any fresh herb you like. I think the recipe calls for basil. It's a couple tablespoons of basil, but you can also use fresh dill or parsley or cilantro. The more fresh herbs, the better. And then you just stir fry all that up, and then you mix 3 large eggs in and grate a bunch of cheese. That's another thing that's really versatile. I use usually a combination of Parmesan and whatever else I have in the fridge at the time. Mm-hmm. And once you've stir fried the greens and the onions and the garlic, you take them out and put them in a bowl and gently stir in the eggs and the cheese. And now you've got your crust that's already cooked, and you throw all those wet ingredients into the pie crust and bake it for about 30 minutes. And so it's sort of like quiche, but it's not quite as eggy. It's a little bit more on the vegetable side. It's more green.
I was going to ask you what the difference between that and the quiche was. So you got me there. You jumped ahead there. Yeah, that's what it sounds like. It sounds delicious.
Yeah, it's really nice. And it's nice too because you can just kind of throw in whatever green stuff you have around as long as they are tender enough. I wouldn't advise, kale unless it's kale is really tender in the winter, so I would use winter kale. If it's summertime, don't use kale because it tends to get kind of coarse in the summer.
I always make a joke. It tastes a little like paper.
The kale?
Kale, yeah. I guess I must have been eating that. What was it, the summer kale or the winter kale? That it tastes like paper to me.
Yeah, if it's kind of tough, it's probably in the summer. Yeah.
Well, I got to go for that winter kale. Maybe I'll like it better.
Yeah. It's more tender in the winter, and dinosaur kale is way better, I think, than the other kinds of kale. So that's what I would recommend. But chard is always tender, so you don't have to worry about when you're picking the chard because it's always very tender. It's almost like spinach. It's so tender. But you can use beet greens or spinach, even a little bit of arugula. It's really versatile.
Well,
So then you've got the second pie crust, and if you have a child like mine, then he's going to want to make that into something with cinnamon and sugar. So that's what he actually did a couple weeks ago with the second one, is he rolled it out and then put a whole bunch of butter and cinnamon sugar and then rolled it up and cut it in little teeny cinnamon roll things and then baked it for, I don't know how long he did it, 10 or 15 minutes. And there's like these amazing little crispy miniature cinnamon roll type things. Super yummy.
Oh, that does sound good. I was going to ask, what
Yeah.
would you like? When would you serve this tart? Would you serve it for breakfast, brunch? When do you
I
usually?
usually do it for dinner. Yeah, we usually have
Mm.
it for dinner. And then if there's leftovers, you can have it for breakfast the next morning at room temperature. So if you don't, I tend to be a little bit loosey-goosey on whether to refrigerate things. So I'll often leave it out overnight and then just eat it the next morning. It's not as good if it's been in the fridge.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'll have it the next morning.
I get what you mean. It's funny because I think we as Americans like to refrigerate everything so much.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
visited Brazil and they leave their meat on the counter, like they'll make a pork roast or whatever roast they're making, and they'll leave it on the counter for a couple of days, and
Mhm.
no one's dying of ptomaine or anything. But as Americans, as Americans, we're just like throw it in the fridge quick.
Yeah, definitely. And there's definitely some things that do not do well being put in the fridge. So yeah, especially some fruits are really not good if you refrigerate them. We're often having this discussion in our household about whether things can go in the fridge because I'm kind of the anti-fridge person in our family. Yeah.
Well, what are some of the things that you think most people would put in the fridge that you don't put in the fridge?
Well, peaches can get pretty mealy if you put them in the fridge.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Um,
I agree
and
with you.
then and rice can get kind of dried out if it's
Yes.
obviously if it's already cooked. And so yeah, I'm often kind of trying to wait on that. And I mean, it can get really awful and toxic if it does grow stuff. So you don't want to mess around with that. But one day out of the fridge, it's totally okay. And so I often
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. I
wait on
agree
rice.
with you there.
Yeah.
But so let me ask you, what would you advise our listeners, if they're going blind or if they know a blind person, what are some of the things you would say to them?
Well, one of the first things that I learned when I was going blind and kind of reaching out for help was there's this concept of blind skills, which to me was really inspirational, that there was like this thing called blind skills. And I guess the main point to make about blind skills is that it basically tells you that you can be good at being blind. You can cope with being blind by learning stuff. And when I was first going blind, I just felt like, okay, well, this is the end. I'm not going to be able to do stuff. And it really kind of opened doors for me to think about the fact that there is a set of skills that you have to learn if you're going blind. And then once you learn them, you can continue to do stuff. You can like live your life. And a lot of people, when they first go blind, are scared to leave the house. I mean, I definitely became less active and my world closed in before I was able to acquire some of the skills. And it really made a huge difference for me to get orientational mobility training and be out there and I have a really wonderful orientational mobility trainer, and she's kind of hard ass. She'd just be like, all right, come on, we're just doing it. You can do it. And I've been learning from her for many years, and it is so freeing to realize that you just have to learn stuff and then you can still be okay. And I actually went to a support group when I was first going blind, and that was really, really helpful for me to be in a group of blind people who were not crying in their beers about being blind. They were just yucking it up and hanging out together and just being blind and being like, yeah, there's some struggles, but we're all okay. And it's really was very important for me to meet other blind people who were spending most of their time just being people, but knowing how to be blind and live I needed that kind of sort of mentorship, if you will.
Well, if anyone wants to reach out to you, Rachel, how do they do that?
Oh, people could email me at my full name at gmail.com. So Rachel Longan. That's probably the best way to reach me.
And that's with an AN, not an EN like I was writing.
Oh, I didn't notice that you had spelled it that way because, of course, I can't see. So my
No.
phone probably just read it. So it's RachelLongan@gmail.com.
I corrected myself. I caught myself on it because the email came back, and I'm like, oh, that was my problem.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for spending your time with us today. We really enjoyed it. And
My pleasure.
and if you want, you are going to be recipe of the day. So if you go to our website, www.cookingwithoutlookingtv.wordpress.com, you'll be able to see Rachel's recipe for the Chard Tart on Wednesday. And so again, thank you, Rachel, and thank you for helping us change the way we see blindness.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. A pleasure having you as well, Rachel.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.